Hi there, I'm Neal Ormond, Technical Director of San Francisco Shakespeare Festival. In this series, we're utilizing our drone to give you a bird's eye view of past scenic designs and an inside look at the hidden details that go into their design and construction. Here, we're looking back at our set from 2019's Free Shakespeare in the Park production of As You Like It. And I think this design really highlights one of the biggest engineering challenges to putting on a production of this size in 5 different outdoor venues, which is that none of them have an existing stage floor and none of them have a ceiling or overhead structure. Now, as you may know, much of As You Like It takes place in the forest of Arden, so we kind of had to do trees. And in fact, the trees became the primary design element, with 26 of them in total, ranging from 16 to 20 feet tall. So in addition to the lack of floor and ceiling, having our set live for 3 months in outdoor public spaces means a lot of additional constraints, like it has to withstand water from the sprinklers in Pleasanton, and crazy winds in the Presidio, and vandalism in Redwood City, plus stand up to the force of the actors as they climb and swing on the trees, and most difficult of all, stand up to the crazy forces exerted by the wind on the red fabric walls when they're stretched up between the trees like this. They're basically 3 giant sails, and the wind was just trying to put on its own performance of The Tempest. So obviously these trees had to be very sturdy, and in a traditional theater setting that wouldn't have been much of a challenge. You just build these simple long boxes and then set them up and screw them into the floor and bolt them to the overhead grid, and that alone would be enough to support the actors and the trees. And indoors you don't have to worry about weather and vandals. But without an existing floor and ceiling, it's a whole different matter. Enter the truss. The truss is the steel structure that supports our stage and everything on it, and there's actually enough content to do a whole separate segment about the truss, so maybe stay tuned for that episode. But basically it consists of over 50 segments of steel truss work that get bolted together and raised up and leveled on a whole bunch of 2x4 legs. Then 2 layers of flooring go down on top of that, and the set gets erected on top. It's a few thousand pounds worth of steel. It takes up a lot of space in storage and moving, and it's the biggest single cost in moving the show from one venue to the next. It takes a team of 12 people and 3 whole days just to get the truss disassembled in the old venue and reassembled in the new one. Plus, it's not exactly orderly or logical the way the pieces fit together, and there's a lot of ways to screw it up, so yeah, it's a big pain. But it's also built like a tank, and it's our saving grace in the case where you need trees like this. So, once the truss and floor are installed, the first thought might be to just screw the trees into the floor or use some L brackets to connect between the base of the tree and the floor. The problem is, with all that height of the tree plus the forces on them and nothing supporting the tree at the top, those screws or brackets would be at such a mechanical disadvantage, they'd get ripped right out of the floor. Even with big old L brackets and bolts, it would just rip through the wood of the floor. On top of that, if these semi-abstract square trees were all perfectly vertical, it would have looked more like a construction site than a forest, so they needed to all be set at various slightly off angles, which made them inherently unbalanced. I considered having little flanges at the base of the trees to spread out the footprint of the tree's force and be able to bolt through an area at least a few inches wider, but even that would have been vulnerable in cases of really high winds or attempted vandalism, and it would have presented a tripping hazard. What was needed was some way of attaining greater mechanical advantage for that mounting point at the floor, and the solution was to utilize the 16-inch depth of the truss to serve as leverage for a 4-inch wide steel beam to be bolted on during assembly. Those steel beams projected up and through the floorboards an additional 2 feet, serving as a super solid anchor point for the trees. The trees were constructed as hollow half-inch plywood boxes, but with a solid wood core in the bottom 3 feet, to provide a strong and snug interface with the steel anchor beam. This way the trees could just be slid on and off those beams during load in and load out, and their mass alone kept them really firmly in place. And the results were a success. The trees survived everything nature and humans threw at them and performed perfectly throughout. So the moral of the story is, even when you're feeling like your stage truss is cumbersome and a hassle, be thankful for the stability and leverage that it's happy to provide you when designing for outdoor theater. Until next time, I'm Neal Ormond. Now fly away!